Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
When we think of hadith, we think of something that the Prophet Muhammad did or approved or said, right? But Dr. Shabir, there is an interesting phenomenon of hadith being forged, right? It's an unfortunate reality that people fabricated hadith and said that the Prophet Muhammad said this or did this or approved of this, and so encouraged other people to do it as well. So can you speak a little bit about that phenomenon, Dr. Shabir?
Yes. Within the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, this could hardly have occurred because, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was there. Nobody would dare to tell a lie because they know it would soon be found out. But it was still possible. And even later narratives have, for example, an interesting incident that a certain man went to the father of a girl he wanted to marry and said that the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent me here to get married to your daughter. And when it was investigated, it was found that the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not actually issue any such instruction for him. So he just simply made up a lie.
So is this in the lifetime of the Prophet?
Yeah, this occurred within the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him. But of course, not much of this could have happened again and again. But you can see how easily somebody might misreport for whatever reasons. Somebody may want to get an advantage at the moment, just like this man wanted to marry this girl. For whatever personal objectives they had, they could have made up stories. But by and large, we're dealing with the hadith forgeries that occurred after the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away. Now he's no longer there, and you cannot go check with him, did he actually say this? So people had more of a field day in coming up with things. So some scholars in our history later on have compiled books of forged hadiths, like Ibn al-Jawzi, for example. And even now in English translation, you will find sometimes little books of forged hadiths to give you a sampling of the types of things that people forged in the past, so that you might be aware in case somebody comes up with a narrative and bandies it about and says that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said this, you should be watchful of these. So they wrote these books to warn people against them. Now, despite all of these warnings and many centuries of knowing about this phenomenon, we still have forged hadiths that are there in our minds. And sometimes I could be guilty of this as well. And I became even more alerted to this when I stumbled upon a YouTube video prepared by a sincere Muslim who wants to warn people against following forged hadiths. And what he did was he clipped together a number of videos from famous Muslim speakers who are very popular in the world, each one shown to be citing a forged hadith. Now, I wasn't honored to make that list, but these are
it's
very
a good thing
famous.
you weren't on that list.
Well, yes, may God save us all. But I'm not saying that I'm immune from that, because what has happened here is that we've heard these narratives again and again, and sometimes the more scandalous and the more sensational, the more these get circulated. And
it's like social media.
Yeah,
right?
And sometimes we can hardly remember the difference between the ones that are genuine and the ones that are not, because they're all in our minds. We heard them like songs in our heads. We can't get the tunes out. So, for example, a scholar is cited as saying that, when we sacrifice an animal for the pleasure of God, then we get rewards as many as the hairs on that animal. So I would have thought that is a genuine narrative because we heard it so many times and repeated so many times. But according to that clip, no, it's not the genuine hadith, it's a forgery. So that shows that we could all fall into that very easily. And naturally, the early Muslim communities, hearing the hadiths being told again and again, especially by storytellers in the mosques who wanted to relate the more sensational things and capture the attention of the public and so on, and captivate their audiences with these remarkable stories. These are the things that people heard again and again. So what was to be done about all of these narratives? That's where the Muslim scholars set to work to try to differentiate between the forged narratives and the authentic tidbits that we can trace right back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
So, Dr. Shabir, do you think that in that early time it was easy to tell what was forged or not? Because they were closer to the Prophet Muhammad, right? Maybe by 100 years or 150 years.
So it was not easy because you, even then, you can say it was relatively easy for the same reason you mentioned. But think about what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with somebody saying that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said ABC. Now, if what we're dealing with is an item that has a barcode, and we have a barcode scanner that can scan it, and then the scanner, gives a nice beep when it's authentic, ping, and when it's inauthentic, right? So we know right away. There's no human judgment involved, right? There's a mechanical process. But with the hadith, it's not a mechanical process. There's a human judgment. So humans have to look at this, and they have to say, okay, you're decades after, you're telling me that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said this, and we know you didn't meet the Prophet, peace be upon him. Okay, so who did you get it from? So you name your source. So we ask, okay, who is that source? Do we trust that person? So let's say that person was thought to have a different belief than I have. And we think, okay, maybe he invented this narrative to support his belief, contrary to mine. So I'm not going to take this narrative. And in fact, I won't take anything he says because it looks like he's a liar. So, but another person who believes as that informer believes, might take all of his narratives, including the one in question. And so we have different humans applying this sort of judgment about who we're going to take the narratives from. That's the first thing. The second thing is the kind of thing that is being narrated that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said. Like, what sort of thing is he saying? I've already hinted at this by talking about our beliefs, if it is something in line with my belief or not. What if it's in line with not only with belief, but also my political inclinations, my sense of what is meant by social justice? So we have, as is noted in almost any introductory book on the history of Hadith, written by Muslims, faithfully representing the faith, no one trying to pick holes in the faith or anything like this, but everybody will acknowledge that hadiths were forged for a wide variety of reasons. And we can see these showing in the books that have been collected of forged hadiths, because the forged hadiths are of this nature. Some support a particular political entity. Some support a particular theological slant. Some support like putting women in, their ancient place, as opposed to, what we might think might be the place for women today in modern society. A wide variety of you can say motives were behind the forgery of hadith.
And then, Dr. Shabir, to follow up on my previous statement asking about the early times and whether they were closer to the Prophet, the interesting thing is that there were schisms soon after the Prophet died. There were divisions. People started separating. There was war between Muslim factions, right? And then the Sunni-Shiite split happened then as well, right? So very early on, there was a reason to fabricate hadith politically and theologically.
Yes, that's right. And when you ask me, was it easy? It was difficult for these very reasons, because people were inventing things, and the best that the hadith scholars could do as they're weighing and sifting is to ask about the character of the individuals.
And sometimes those are people of good character, right?
Yes.
But they just had a different political or theological slant.
Or political interest, yeah. And because it did not align with the developing field of what we might call the hadith classification and study, then their narratives were not collected. And so what is commonly mentioned in books of introductory books on hadith is that the Shi'is, this is how it is said, that the Shi'is invented things to support their faction. And then the Sunnis, in order to counter them, realized that they had to invent the contrary narratives. And so they did. And when the Shi'is saw what the Sunnis were doing, they increased their efforts at forging hadiths all the more.
This is the Sunni understanding.
There's the Sunni understanding. Like in Sunni books of introduction to hadith, you will find that a narrative like this is mentioned. And more so, it is even said that a certain person was, in his dying moment, confessing that he invented like thousands of hadiths. So the problem then is that first of all, we don't know if that is just his idle boast or he really did invent. And secondly, if he did invent, which are those inventions? So in short, the scholars were human beings. They did the best they can to sift the narratives, to find out who said what, when, and did they meet each other? Are they trustworthy persons and so on? But that was from the perspective of the collectors. Second was the content itself dependable. Is it the kind of thing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, might have said or did? Or is it the kind of thing that somebody might have invented for various reasons? So they used their best judgment and they kept these narratives. Now, it is time for us to think about whether their judgment was final or there is a scope for us to revisit. And certainly when we look at problematic hadiths, we will see that, yes, there is all the need today to revisit the works and to ask the questions all over again. And some people have started to ask that, and what we need to do more.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome. The most effective and far-reaching dawah we can do these days is on social media. That's why we're developing the Muslim Media Hub. We're harnessing the power of media to spread the message of Islam. Please support this project at QuranSpeaks.com and share in the reward from God.